This third discussion today about some of the biggest global challenges facing society with distinguished Institute of Current World Affairs alumni here at the House of Sweden. In an age of mounting nativism, populism, and corruption, in which identity politics are deepening polarization, how can music, art, literature, and other cultural forms help bridge national and economic divides? And also, is it possible to keep high culture accessible to most at a time of rising inequality for many? And we have an absolutely stellar panel to discuss these issues here with us. Roger Reynolds is a Pulitzer Prize-winning composer. He helped establish the University of California, San Diego's music department, where he teaches today. In 1998, the Library of Congress established a special collection of his work, and he was inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Letters in 2023. He was an ICWA Fellow in Japan in 1966 to 1971, studying music, culture, and perceptions of time. Kenneth Cavender. Kenneth is an award-winning theater and screen producer and director and writer whose work has been widely performed in the United States and in Britain, including on Broadway at the Yale Repertory Theater and by the Royal Shakespeare Company. As a US-based fellow from 1973 to 1976, he examined theater and myth in the aftermath of Watergate, the Vietnam War, and youth and sexual revolutions. And Bryn Barnard, on the end, is an illustrator, artist, and a teacher. He worked with the Far Eastern Economic Review, National Geographic, and NASA, among many others, and with schools and universities in Kuwait, Korea, Singapore, Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. His books include Dangerous Planet, Plagues That Changed History, The Genius of Islam, How Muslims Made the Modern World, and The New Ocean, The Fate of Life in a Changing Sea. During his fellowship in 1981 to 1984, he traveled to Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, Nepal, and Thailand, examining visual communication in Southeast Asia. And I hope I haven't left any countries out. And our moderator next to me, Jean-Benoit Nadeau, is a Canadian writer, journalist, and a leading explicator
Yes.
of French customs. His ICWA Fellowship in France from 1999 to 2001 focused on the response of the French to globalization. His books include The Bonjour Effect and 60 Million Frenchmen Can't Be Wrong, both co-written with his wife, Julie Barlow. And he's also written for L'Actualité, The New York Times, and elsewhere. So our panelists will talk for 45 minutes, then we'll finish with a Q&A with the audience here in person and take questions over Zoom if we can, if we have time. For those joining virtually, please type your questions into the chat box. And for those asking questions here in the room, please give your name and affiliation and keep to one brief question. And with that, Jean-Benoit, it's all yours.
Yes, and I will do my best to be brief because I want to leave as much time to our special guests. We have here a panel of very, very special. Well, all fellowships and fellows are special, but these three are particularly special because they were artists in the field doing art. And they're going to make their presentation at the podium for reasons of lighting and shadows on the screens. But I want you to pay special attention to the fact that, remember that tomorrow we have a meeting where we're going to talk about the future of the Institute. And I think that what you're going to hear today may feed that reflection in the sense that they've done a type of fellowship that, with the exception possibly of Tyrone Turner and Susan Sterner in Brazil in 2000, and possibly Alejandro Fogel a little bit later, they are rare and they're precious, and we're about to hear about their experience. We'll start in chronological order with Roger Reynolds, and then Kenneth, and then Bryn. So, Roger, please.
So the task of trying to encapsulate in a few minutes the dimensionality of the experience of being a fellow, particularly in my case many decades ago, is frightening. So I have prepared a text that will help me guide through this. And basically, what I want to do is give you a sense of the arc of the meaning of a fellowship, who I was before, how I came into the fellowship, how the fellowship itself developed, and what came of having been there. Karen and I studied music at the University of Michigan. She was 5 years younger and always sat in the front row of the mutual classes we had. I sat in the back row because, being 6 years older, I felt awkward in the presence of students for whom I had babysat in earlier days. I heard Karen's rapturous piccolo playing in a practice room one day, and I knocked to see who was capable of such remarkable behavior. She performed later a flute and piano work of mine called Mosaic. It had been played in Europe widely, but I had never heard it in person or a recording. Her performance of my music meant things that were completely unexpected to me, right? One, while composing, believes that they're in the process, but what that process brings about is something that remains mysterious. It was a good start for a relationship. We both, as it happened, received Fulbright grants. Mine was to West Germany to work in the West German radio's electronic music studio, where Stockhausen was making a name for himself, and hers was to go to Paris to study flute with Jean-Pierre Rampal. We lived on her meager Fulbright allowance in unheated rooms. We shopped each weekend with a very small budget, purchasing with careful care one potato, one carrot, one onion, one baguette, and that was the month, that was the week rather, okay? So we realized that we might be able to remain in what was then an inexpensive and very exciting culturally Europe through various grant possibilities. And we looked around. Somehow a residency at the Rockefeller Foundation's Villa Cerboloni in northern Italy came about. We were for some time at the villa, but then we were for an entire year in the Casa Rosa servants' quarters down by the lake. Every day we would receive a small basket of provisions, and one day that basket contained a note from the hostess, Charlotte Marshall, and she said there was someone coming to dinner tonight that could be of significance to your future. Why don't you join us? So we did, and the guest of honor was Richard Nolte, who was at that time the Institute's director. After dinner, he asked us up to his room. We had no idea what would ensue. We sat down and he asked the following question: if you could be anywhere, where would you be? You can imagine what sort of astonishment that brought about in our minds. We had no idea who he was, who the Institute was, and so on. So we spent the entire night considering the possibilities of India and Japan. They seemed both culturally vibrant, and they were places we knew absolutely nothing about. We had to decide yes or no immediately. You had to be able to change your life in one day. That was the game. And of course, we were able to play the game. And we told Nolte the next morning we want to go to Japan. He said, we'll be in touch. So several months later, we received a telegram. It was still in those days telegrams. And he said, the fellowship is approved, etc. And there were really no boundary conditions except one extremely important one. He said to us, ask for what you need. So the ball was always in our court, right? could we ask for this or not? And of course, normally we tended not to ask. We wrote,
A carrot.
yes, yeah, a carrot, a large carrot. Yeah. Okay. So we wrote monthly newsletters about our experiences. So arriving in Japan, the first really discombobulating experience was that we were about 6 inches taller than everyone else. And that feeling that you are suddenly a giant, and a helpless giant at that, with Gulliver maybe, it was quite an introduction. So it was a unique moment in Japanese history because, of course, they were in what they call low posture because they had lost the Second World War, of course, and they were remarkably interested in gaikokujins, people from other societies, right? What did we know? What did we do? Even what do we wear? And we found that there were candid shots in fashion magazines of us walking on the street. Imagine that. Right. So serendipity played a decisive role in what was possible for us to experience. It happened that my music was published by the Peters Edition in New York, and it also published a few Japanese composers. So these composers welcomed us as colleagues immediately, and we were able to circumvent the then really, really significant Japanese social condition of having an intermediary, having someone who was, in a sense, your sponsor, and spoke of your qualities to anyone that you wished to then interface with. And that was taken away for us because of the shared publisher. We found a house in the Shibuya area of Tokyo that had been owned previously by a doctor who had a large waiting room in front in which we realized we could do music rehearsals and so on. It was really quite ideal. We worked up the courage at that point to ask Nolte if we could have a gardener address the weed-infested landscape around our house, and we were a little concerned because our daughter was less than a year old at that point, and we wanted to, care for all those things. So a team of workers arrived early in the morning. They chatted, they drank tea all morning, they had lunch. Nothing had happened. And we were getting really concerned that we were being, as it were, taken for some kind of a very bumpy and dangerous ride. But then suddenly, they acted as an integrated team with enormous skill. They dealt with the garden mess, achieving a wondrously crafted outcome in just a few hours. While they had been drinking tea and chatting, they had, of course, been observing and planning. Our daughter Erica was born there and found great joy in the new garden on sunny days. Studying the Japanese language, we discovered the astonishing relationship between Japanese and Finnish. They are the endpoints of the Finno-Ugric language group. Karen's roots were in the Finnish-American portion of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. On visits there, we would entertain the elderly Finnish-oriented people by saying such phrases as onna noko to otoko noko, which they would realize was sonically extremely close to Finnish, but they had no idea what it meant. So we established relationships with Japanese colleagues in a variety of arts because of this natural connectivity that our publishing our shared publishing situation allowed. So we met future Nobel Prize winning authors like Kenzaburo Oe. We met artists, painters, sculptors, filmmakers, and so on. We collaborated with two of the people that we came in touch with there to form an initiative called Crosstalk, the purpose of which was bringing American and Japanese performance art together in presentations that were actually sponsored by the Asahi Shimbun, which is sort of the New York Times of Japan. We did a 3-day festival at the very end of our fellowship in Kenzo Tangei's Olympic Gymnasium, which drew 10,000 people. The legendary maverick innovator and inventor Buckminster Fuller was reading our newsletters, and he proposed that we meet when he was next in Tokyo. The wealthy entrepreneur Matsutaro Shoriki arranged meetings of innovative architects such as Fuller and Tange occasionally, the purpose of planning a floating city in Tokyo Bay that would foresee the future issues of rising tide and of crowding. The idea is it was a pyramid shape, a kilometer on a side. Clearly a very ambitious goal. So we invited one night noted Japanese architects, critics, composers, and artists to an evening with Bucky Fuller at our house. Fuller gave hour-long disquisitions, which circled out from a beginning into what seemed like really uncharted waters. Why is he there, right? Returning finally to the original subject and having illuminated it in a quite marvelous way. So extraordinary length and mysteriousness was not a problem for our Japanese visitors, guests, but their notorious inability to distinguish between L and R was. Bucky explored how essential to island cultures the guidance of nautical pilots was. He understood Japan and also Britain to be island societies. Our guests, confused, were understanding his word pilots as pirates, as in Pirates of the Caribbean. The formidable composer Toru Takemitsu became a close friend. At first, we had little language together, and we went to movies, which we both loved. And we used gestures and also arranging items of food on our restaurant plates in order to share responses. Fortunately, that improved as time went on, and we gained a little more linguistic communicative power. After we returned to the U.S. and made home in the coastal town of Del Mar, I continued to visit Japan, collaborating with various artists that we had made connections with during our time there. During one period of time, when there was a conference between American and Japanese compatriots, Toru invited me to his mountain getaway in Karuizawa. And I had there what I called the bath experience. So I was exhausted because I had flown 18 hours over Russia from Paris to get there, et cetera, et cetera. He said, "You take a bath." Okay. So actually the bath room was quite large, larger than I had expected, and there were only 3 things in it. There was a bucket of water, a short stool, and then in the far right corner, a menacing object, which I understood was a bathtub, but instead of being this way, it was this way, right? It was very narrow and very deep. And I could see that the surface of water was steam rising from it and so on. So I did what was expected. I washed myself and went over to the bath, put my finger in it, and it was appalling. It was so incredibly hot that I thought, he can't possibly think I'm going to collapse or die or whatever. It must be okay. So I actually managed to get in. I thought that the temperature of my body would reduce the heat, but no, click, and the heater went on, and the et cetera, et cetera. My bones turned to noodles, and I went out to staggered, as it were, with a bath robe into the kitchen. And he had a beautiful wooden table, and it had one dish on it with edame, glistening salt crystals and so on, and a small can like this tall of Sapporo beer. It was exactly what was needed. For supper, Asaka-san brought a large glass bowl of translucent noodles to the table. I was not told how to eat them, so it was really an institute kind of situation. Toru prepared a large mound on his plate, took his ohashi, to the edge, brought it to his mouth, and in one gesture, slurped the whole thing into his mouth. It was alarming and hilarious, just, of course, as he had expected. Another wonder of that evening was hearing the sounds of his neighbor, a legendary master of the traditional lute-like biwa, making extraordinarily otherworldly sounds floating on the evening's breeze.
Thank you. We will now welcome Kenneth, but if you have a chance, go see these newsletters that they wrote. Roger has musical parts, like scores in them, and all sorts of illustrations of his 2 years you spent? 3. It's fantastic.
It's on the website.
Yeah, absolutely must read. Kenneth, it's up to you.
Thank you. When I look at my old newsletters, I see that what I pretended to and promised to do was as follows. Kenneth Cavender proposes to explore our past and present mythologies and our capacities for self-transformation. It came about because at that time I was working as a kind of in-house writer for the Yale Repertory Theatre, and one of the productions that I was involved in was a version of Ovid's Metamorphoses. Metamorphosis, of course, means transformation, and Ovid's work was a compilation of every possible transformation that had taken place throughout history or in mythology to human beings, to gods, to demigods, and usually to their detriment. For instance, Pygmalion started as a statue and became a living being. So that was a good outcome. On the other hand, Narcissus became fascinated with his own reflection in a still pool, and he became a flower. And how to dramatize these stories, fantastic and wonderful as they were, was our main technical problem. And it was solved by a combination of subtraction and imagination. In other words, the actors had simple costumes, work clothes. They had no props. They had no specific sets, and they had to create these stories and the reality of these stories purely by their words and by their actions. And the audience had to engage in a conspiracy of pretense and a conspiracy that they were seeing things that did not actually exist. And so that was the context of my work at the time that I started my fellowship. And what I'm going to do is give you a very rough idea of how that developed in the 3 or 4 years that I worked on these issues. And then I'll try to zero in on a little more close-up of the kind of work we did. I started with a series of myths from every possible continent. By the way, my fellowship was not actually in world affairs. It so happened that the director of the fellowship at that time considered that America was also part of the world. So I never left America, and it was only in my imagination that I was traveling. So, for instance, I tried to work on Arthurian legends. I did a production of Paradise Lost, of all things, at Williamstown Theatre Festival, and I'll come back to a quote from that later on. And I worked here at Arena Stage with Boccaccio's Decameron, and the stories, as you know, from the Decameron are all about the transvaluation of values. Every single value, morality, is turned upside down and cast to the winds. And that was very appropriate in the years of Watergate and Nixon, and if the president does it, it's lawful. And that was it was a musical. I worked with a composer called Richard Peasley, who had worked with Bruch on Marat Sade, and the production became a little bit more successful than they expected, and it was extended. Then I started to feel the ground shifting under my feet. I felt that I had been working with the restrictions and the rituals of real theater, and by real, I mean all the paraphernalia of production, promotion, equity actors, and the restrictions of time and space. And so I moved on to more esoteric workshops. And now that I look back on what I did, I'm a little bit nervous about how I dared to try to explore these things, which were very abstract and in some ways dangerous. I'll get to that in a minute. For instance, what was the Siege Perilous? That phrase comes from Arthurian legend, and the Siege Perilous, siege was a seat in the round table, which was never occupied. If it should be occupied, the unfortunate knight would meet a very quick and messy end. And the reason was that the only knight who could enter the siege, sit in the Siege Perilous, was the knight who was destined to be the discoverer of the Holy Grail. And so what was the Siege Perilous? What was its power? And I spent a lot of time with actors trying to create a space that was, in some sense, haunted and powerful. And so that was one series of experiments. Another was, what if you could relocate your seat of consciousness, not in your head, but in another part of your anatomy, say in a hand? And we played around with that idea for a while, and it led us, or it led people's hands into rather unexpected places. And the more productive but rather risky work that I began to regret a little was dream incubation and dream creation. I tried different versions of that. And in one, for instance, we and a group of other interested characters, not all actors, collected in a Soho loft, and we agreed that we would each spend the night there and go to sleep and ask, as a result of some preoccupation that we had, for a dream to come that would be significant and, if possible, healing or a solution. So we did that. I don't remember what the other dreams were. I know that mine was I was sitting in a field somewhere, and I had set off some rockets, and these rockets went into the sky, and as they came down, they seemed to be falling into a fairground. And then I realized that what if they fell into the fairground and exploded? And then I realized that I would have been responsible for injuries and death. And then I woke up. And it seemed to me that it was obviously a warning that what I was doing was a little bit risky, and I was playing with people's consciousness. So this all took place over a course of 3 or 4 years. And now I want to give you a close-up of something that maybe illustrates a little bit of how I worked. I want to read from it's a few lines from a contemporary account written in 1848 of a group of worshippers. Sometimes all join in one concert of yelling, screaming, shouting, shaking, thumping their feet upon the floor with great rapidity, altogether presenting a scene that cannot be described. So I thought, all right, if it can't be described, I'll try it myself and see what happens. And of course, as you probably guessed, this was an account of a Shaker meeting somewhere in New England. And the Shakers were founded by a woman, an English woman, so I was out in the world again, in the late 18th century, who started around in the 1770s speaking to Jesus and advocating that everybody get rid of all their possessions. And she was arrested for disturbing the Sabbath, and she decided that she wasn't welcome there, that she might be more welcome in America. And indeed she was. And she founded several societies, as they were called, of her believers. And as you probably know, they still exist today. You can see them in Hancock in Massachusetts or Lebanon, and one as far away as Kentucky. And it so happened that I had a chance to run a workshop around then. This was in 1976 at Temple University in Philadelphia with a group of graduate acting students who were in their second year. So they were pretty competent and sophisticated and smart young people. And I thought, well, let's try to create the Shaker experience. But the question was, it was so remote from their experience and their presumably their beliefs and their sense of freedom. And let me read you some of the Shaker laws. There were 200 or more of these millennial laws that the Shakers had to live by. They were, by the way, a commune, as we would call it now, and men and women were equally empowered. And in fact, some of the elders, more powerful elders, were women, but they were not allowed to speak together unless it was absolutely essential. These are some of the laws. All beds shall be green. All objects shall be practical. If you own a Shaker chair, don't get rid of it. They're now very valuable. No fancy articles. Brethren and sisters cannot pass on the stairs. Kneel before and after eating. All believers shall sleep straight with hands over their chest. And if you clasp your hands, make sure that your right thumb goes over your left, and so on and so forth. So these were the challenge. This was a challenge that we and I faced of making this real. And these are some of the things we did. We started the rehearsal each day with a game that seemed to, I don't want to describe how complicated it was, but it was related to tag. And in tag, somebody is it, and they are now the possessor of either an infection or a power. And it can be transferred to somebody else. And in the course of playing the game, the actors became excited, they became like children, and the whole energy of the space was mounted to an intense and feverish pitch. So already we had created something that was powerful. Then we had to, I asked them to create characters and a story. And the story concerned a couple who were trying to be inducted into the Shaker community, and how would they react when they were given the laws, and would they accept them and would they not? And that became the critical moment of decision that was the climax of the story. And in terms of the laws themselves, which both the actors and the actual Shakers often resented or felt oppressed by, we discovered that if you recited them over and over again whilst doing the normal mundane tasks of milking the cows, fixing the furniture, mowing the lawn, it became part of your essence. And out of that, there was a kind of almost joy. And the other part of it was the gifts. Let me explain what the gifts are.
Kenneth?
Gifts were
2 minutes?
the spontaneous images and sometimes actual poems or songs or dances that they claimed came from the spirit of their founder, Ann Lee. And now here are some of the gifts which were presented to each other at the ceremonies. A breastplate of truth, a crown of purity, drums, fur hats, and a gun. So they were, in fact, all imaginary, but they believed that they existed. So that was the material that we used. I think I've probably gone over my time, but let me finish with one quote from Milton's Paradise Lost, which explains or describes what we were doing and what I thought my fellowship was about. This is Raphael, the angel Raphael, speaking to Adam and Eve about how Satan was expelled from heaven. How shall I unfold the secrets of another world, perhaps not lawful to reveal? Yet what surmounts the reach of human sense, I shall delineate so by likening spiritual to corporeal forms, as may express them best. Though what of earth be but a shadow of heaven, and things there, each to other like, more than on earth is thought? That's a good question.
Thank you. Kenneth was a prolific fellow. Wrote 36 or 37 newsletter. Bryn, your turn. Bryn was concerned when he started his fellowship at not being a writer, and it turns out that he was gifted.
Thanks.
Oh yeah.
Okay. See if I can get this to go. Oh, come on. There we go. All right. I'm got some notes up here. Thank you, Jean-Benoit. Thanks, Greg. Thanks to the board for having us here. It's a little intimidating being part of this cohort that's maybe a endangered or vanishing species, the Dewar Fellow. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So in 1979, I was finishing my art and Asian studies degree at UC Berkeley and starting my illustration education at Art Center College of Design. Former fellow Francis Foland suggested I meet Roger, who took me to a great lunch in La Jolla. Roger suggested that I meet Ned Munger up at Caltech. And over the next 2 years of my illustration education, I had multiple meetings and interviews. Eventually, in those days, the Institute had a summer meeting in Salisbury, Connecticut, where I met the board. Peter offered me an ICWA fellowship. Peter Bird Martin, the then executive director. There was some board opposition to my proposal, which had evolved over those 2 years from learning Hindi and working in an animation studio in Mumbai to working in ad agencies in Kuala Lumpur, Singapore, and Jakarta. Mine was what Peter called a doer fellowship. I would be doing art and illustration while writing about contemporary Malaysian, Singaporean, and Indonesian culture through the lens of advertising. Roger and former fellow Will Noland were my avuncles, giving me feedback, in addition to Peter's close edits of my prose. Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia were familiar places to me. I'd been an exchange student in a village near Singapore in 1973, where I lived for a year with a family of shamans. In 1977, I'd lived for half a year on the island of Penang as part of a wayang kulit shadow puppet theater troupe, and for another 6 months on the island of Java, where I did field research on batik wax-resist printing. I spoke the language, I was comfortable with the customs, and I enjoyed the torrid heat. Once I got to Malaysia, I started working at an ad agency as an in-house illustrator and participant observer. Since in those days my hair was chestnut-hued, the Cantonese staff called me Ang Mo Guai, the red-haired devil, and because of my light skin, Guai Lo, the ghost man or ghost devil. The Australian creative director called me mate. He created ads in English, and the Malaysian copywriters translated his catchphrases into Malay, Mandarin, and Tamil, which sometimes created hilarious results. My newly learned illustration skills were in high demand in KL's small art pond. I realized, however, that my initial plan to document how international corporations made their products attractive to Malaysian consumers would take months. And in those days, the ICRA rule was no newsletter, no money. If I wanted a monthly check, I needed to ensure that a monthly newsletter, along with a precise accounting of expenses and receipts, arrived on time every 30 days at ICWA headquarters in Hanover, New Hampshire. So I began writing on other topics with shorter timelines. Peter said I could buy a used motorcycle to get around. I became known in KL as the sweating foreigner pushing his broken-down Honda 250 through the city's monsoon-washed streets, searching for a repair shop. I painted, I drew, I sketched, mostly outside, sitting in outdoor cafes or on the sidewalk or on the ground, interpreting and recording the vanishing world of Kuala Lumpur in pen, pencil, acrylic gouache, and oil. Often I attracted a crowd of kibitzers. What's the sweating foreigner up to this time? Why is he drawing that pile of bricks, those drain tiles, that rusting crane? What is up with that? Over the course of several newsletters, I studied the conversion of Kuala Lumpur from a British and Chinese city to a Malay metropolis. The Malays, the country's newly politically empowered racial majority, had begun the project of erasing the influence of their former colonial masters, the British, and their economic rivals, the Chinese. For Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad, a transformative political figure who came to power in 1981, the year my fellowship started, architecture was a crucial component of this project. So, at age 26, I began the intimidating task of interviewing Malaysia's top Malay architects who were leading the way in this effort. As one architect told me, if you can sketch something on a napkin and get it in front of Mahathir and concoct a convincing cultural story, it's go time. So dragon roofs were crushed by wrecking balls, shop houses were steamrolled into rubble, and from the ruins sprang malls and skyscrapers decorated with oversized geometric screens, Arabic calligraphy, domes, and minarets. The old, human-scale Chinese and British city was transformed into a soaring Islamic capital fit for giants. The visual transformation of KL was not really from British and Chinese to Malay, but from British and Chinese to Arab. This reflected the government's efforts to keep the Malay Muslim conservative, religious conservatives at bay by creating Islamic universities, Islamic think tanks, Islamic banks, and other Islamic institutions, and the success of Saudi Arabia's decades-long missionary effort to replace easygoing Malay Islam with the rigid Wahhabi brand. As my fellowship was ending, ground was being broken on a new administrative capital, Putrajaya, with Arab Islamic buildings of a truly astonishing scale. Think Fatehpur Sikri, as imagined by Albert Speer. This architectural abracadabra was accompanied by the rise of a new ethno-nationalist ethic, Ketuanan Melayu, that is, Malay superiority. In this telling, Malaysia was no longer a melting pot of immigrant races, but the domain of a single superior Malay race. Everyone else, Chinese, Indian, Eurasian, were immigrants, even if they'd lived in the country for centuries. Sound familiar? The theory came with its own flim-flam men and women who professed to show the scientific and historical basis for these ethno-nationalist claims. Malay superiority has been remarkably successful in ginning up populism, exacerbating nativism, and deepening populism. So, fair warning, America. I was curious if this top-down effort was reflected at the local level, so I began looking at tourist art, something I'd studied during my anthropology training. Here, I found a world more akin to the version of Malaysia's founders, a Malaysia where Malays, Chinese, Indians, and Eurasians were cultural, political, religious, economic, and aesthetic equals. Here, local artists use foreign stereotypes to make their souvenirs more saleable. Subject matter focused on village life, hamlets, palm trees, fishing boats. To improve sales, sculptors would take shellac and shoe polish and darkened the blonde wood of their sculptures so that they resonated with touristic preconceptions. Batik painters made sure that their work was suitcase-sized for ease of transport. It was a kind of a halting, stuttering conversation, an attempt at mutual understanding through art. During the second year of my fellowship, I moved to an ad agency in Jakarta. There, the Javanese staff called me Bule, albino. As in Malaysia, ads were created in English, then translated into slangy Jakartanese, Sundanese, Javanese, and other languages, and Indonesian. I created art for toothpaste, soap, shampoo, and chocolate milk powder ads. I studied hand-painted movie billboards, how they were made, and who made them. Meanwhile, my tourist art research deepened. I visited the island of Nias, the Toraja region of Sulawesi, and especially Bali. Bali is studied for its unique and uniquely resilient culture, not just by me. Year in, year out, the island endures mass tourism on a prodigious scale. On an island of only 4 million people, 11 million people a year visited in 2024. Yet, the Balinese managed to maintain their complex religious rituals in tandem with a vigorous tourist art production. Starting in the 1930s, under the direction of European artists like Walter Spies and Rudolf Bonnet, 3-day temple festivals that would bore foreigners to tears were shortened to an hour, keeping in just the exciting bits for foreign attention spans. Stone temple carving skills were redirected into wood, bone, metal, and glass. Painting, a skill that had almost died out, was resurrected. Today, the island of Bali has become to the world of art and design what China is to technology, the workshop of the world. Because the Balinese have no belief in artistic authorship in the Western sense, copying was rampant. If one artist managed to sell a frog painting, soon his whole village was doing frog paintings. Pretty soon the entire island was doing frog paintings, the same frog painting. Long before AI was scraping the internet for imagery, on Bali, everyone was stealing from everyone else. No one had a problem with it. Perhaps this is because the Balinese have no word for art. Carving, music, dance, and painting are just integral to their lives. The Balinese have become expert copyists of just about every kind of art imaginable. One Chicago entrepreneur I met combed Java for old Dutch factories, bought and disassembled them, shipped the century-old teak to Bali, where the wood was crafted into furniture for American design boutiques. Another hustler shipped fossilized mammoth ivory from Alaska to Bali, where it was crafted into Native American-style artwork for sale in shops in the Southwest. It was pretty head-spinning. So, my fellowship changed considerably from my initial proposal, remember, animation studio in Mumbai, to my final newsletter. I was interested in everything, and I would happily have spent another 2 years exploring and writing and painting. Eventually, however, one needs to take the lessons of the fellowship and try to apply them in the real world. In my case, that was a career in illustration, where again, I was interested in everything. To get back to the question guiding our discussion, I think back to what has happened to Malaysia in the years since Mahathir, the neoliberal populist who broke rules, ignored traditions, and colluded with the Islamic right. He stepped down in 2003, Malaysia's longest-serving prime minister, leaving a country far more unequal, corrupt, and violent than the one he inherited. In 2006, for example, the Mongolian intermediary for Malaysia's purchase of 2 French submarines was murdered after complaining that her $500,000 payoff for the deal had been withheld. Her body was obliterated using military-grade explosives. In 2018, the corruption of Mahathir's hand-picked successor, Najib Razak, and his wife, Rosmah Mansur, became so blatant, so audacious that they were finally arrested. The police found an official residence full of bags of cash and boxes of Birkin handbags. Over $500 million of public money simply disappeared. They went to jail, and at age 92, Mahathir came out of retirement to become briefly the oldest prime minister in the world, this time as leader of the opposition. He stepped down, but his legacy lives on. A new class of Malay billionaires and a repressive, authoritarian, and suffocatingly religious society. In this new Malaysia, artists and performers create cautiously, using euphemism and allegory to get by the censors and keep their heads on their shoulders. Their work is either safe and anodyne or extremely personal, avoiding politics. Some of the most experimental and norm-challenging are the productions of Five Arts Center, which was just getting started at the end of my fellowship. My handprint, the Five Arts logo, is still used today. Five Arts has managed to thread the needle between art that is edgy and art that will land you in jail, or worse. Singapore used to be part of Malaysia. It's now a brisk, beautiful city-state with immaculate streets, efficient robot subways, and inexpensive, accessible, world-class museums. I was teaching art in Singapore during COVID, an experience my wife and I greatly appreciated. Government messaging was consistent and transparent. People did as they were told, everyone distanced, everyone wore masks, everyone got their shots. Singapore's per capita death toll from COVID was a fraction of Malaysia and the US. Of course, beneficent government dominated by one party has its dark side. Protest is illegal in Singapore. During COVID, a protester was briefly jailed for holding up a sign near a police station with nothing on it but a happy face. Public art has the potential to cross class, race, and political barriers. It's very accessible. Singapore has lots of it. But as in so many countries, Singapore's public artworks, sculptures, murals, and installations seem to have been commissioned in the hope that they will offend no one, at least no one Singaporean. They're mostly ignored. There is, however, one exception. It's my favorite piece of public art, not just in Singapore, but anywhere. At Beauty World, a plain, no-frills subway station in an area of the island known mostly for its down-market mall, public housing flats, and cheap hawker stalls, the Javanese Singaporean artist Budi Wijaya has installed a 300-foot-long wall mural that consists of nothing but polished beige granite tiles with jet black areas of positive and negative space that are almost, but not quite, readable as Arabic, Javanese, Tamil, and Chinese characters, superimposed one atop the other. Wijaya calls his elegant, restrained creation asemic lines. I discovered the work by accident, and during the 4 years I lived in Singapore, visited it as often as I could. As you walk along the passageway from the train station to the mall, asemic lines pulsates as the different languages compete for legibility. They resolve, disintegrate, recompose, and collapse into babble over and over again. Most people hurry by the artwork, but now and then I see a kindred spirit standing, entranced. When I asked Budi Wijaya what his artwork was about, his response was enigmatic. Asemic means without meaning, he said. It says whatever you want it to say. It means whatever you want it to mean. Or it means nothing at all. It's just art. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Bryn. I think we will open the room immediately for questions. While you get ready, I have one. What is, in your opinion, the value of what you did as fellows for the Institute or for the public, and how it has to be done again?
I think the thing that mattered most to me about that experience was the fact that this idea of cross-talking was elaborated by the fact that a Japanese composer, Joji Iwasa, joined our faculty at UCSD and gave marvelous guidance in ways that students would never have gotten from Eurocentric or American professors. Secondly, I became close to the great Japanese director Suzuki Tadashi, and he also became associated with UCSD theater program, and he transforms the world. I mean, that transformation came up. He transforms the world. He does only 3 kinds of theater: Shakespeare, Chekhov, and Beckett, and he adapts them. He doesn't ever do them as they were.
Okay.
He does them as he thought they should be now for our world, for our time. And he deals with and dealt with actors of such magnetic power that one in particular, it's one of these people who is famous with one-word names, Shiraishi. Shiraishi, when she walks into the room, everything stops.
Okay.
I think everybody who works in theater is struck dumb by the idea that what they do has any value whatsoever. But to the extent that I think, looking back at the things that I did after my fellowship, what I was concentrating on was talking about or dramatizing issues that were asleep in people's unconsciousness and maybe were awakened by a certain playfulness in their execution. And if that is of value, then I think that may be my only answer.
Okay. Bryn.
As I mentioned in my talk, I did a lot of sketching and painting and drawing, a lot of plein air work during my fellowship. As I said, I was right out of art school when I started this, and that's become integral to my practice. I do that, and I don't know if that would have been the case. You know, the typical graduate of the art school I went to goes and works in a studio and cranks out illustrations for the ad industry or books or the movie industry. But engaging in the world in that way, interpreting the world, observing the world, close observation of the real world became really important. That was important to me. So that was one of the things that it did. But also, later when I became a teacher, the Institute experience helped me go beyond what I would have done without it as a teacher. I was able to encourage students to delve into themselves in ways that I probably wouldn't have otherwise. Like, I'll just give you an example. I had a student I taught in Kuwait and Korea and Singapore, high school art teacher, international school. I had this student in Kuwait, his name was Faras, and they're asked to come into the program in 11th grade and bring a sketchbook. And he was very assiduous. He brought in a sketchbook with pictures of Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt, really, really good likenesses, that kind of thing. He's very proud of them. And 3 months after I met him, his mother died. She'd had cancer for years, but they knew she was going to die eventually, but this was unexpected. And he plunged him into deep grief and transformed his art. And so by the time 2 years later, he did his final show, each student is given a little section of the gallery, and he had a portrait of his mother. He'd started this before she died. Then he had an oxygen mask in a field of lilies on the wall. It was the mask that she wore. He also did her hospital bed with flowers growing out of it. Another portrait of her with 108 reasons that cancer is great. That he, in her handwriting, that he superimposed over a portrait. And the final piece that he did, it was a box about this high, and it was turquoise with gold on top, or turquoise, as they say in Kuwait, with gold on top with her name written in Arabic. And on the front were 2 panels that had fluorescent lights behind and had her lung X-rays on the front. And then you opened the door, and the inside was jet black with a little rod and a pin light and a single white scarf over it. He, as the eldest boy, even in Shia Islam, as practiced in Kuwait, was responsible 40 days after his mother's death for cleaning out her closet. And this was called cleaning out her closet. So the boy who started out doing Angelina and Jolie and Brad Pitt portraits ended up doing this and has gone on to do wonderful things in art. Had I not had the Institute Fellowship, I would not have been able to push him in that direction. And of course, the experience of his mother's death did this, but we were able to, just how can you take that and transform it into art? People were weeping. When we take, how does art communicate with people? Whether they were Kuwaiti or Lebanese or Syrian or American, they all got it.
Fellowships of experimentations. Questions from the...
I wasn't on the streets in 1968 because I was in elementary school, but what you read and see about that was like Pete Seeger, the MLK speech. It seemed a little bit more unified than the types of protest we are having today. And I guess my question is, now that anyone can go on YouTube, including me, and everyone can be an artist because we have an iPhone, is it possible for art to change society by unifying when there's such a cacophony of art and would-be art and wannabe art? And if the answer is yes, then maybe how could art, music, drawing, plays change society? Or is our attention span just too short? No.
I think the idea that there is an audience is completely outdated. In other words, an audience is a group of people of significant size that have shared so much that there are normatives of expectation, normatives of preparation, and so on and so on. So one of the things that is a bugaboo for, I think, art at this period of time, and of course it's true in all professions, is that we assume that there's some kind of unitariness to the audience we're speaking to. But if you imagine what the audience was in Vienna in Beethoven's last decade, where there were only 2 or 3 options of what you could do during a day, versus now, when there's a plethora of ways in which you can spend your time and in which you can be quite expert. I think that the idea of sharing is extremely important and essential. But I feel personally that the only kind of sharing that really will build things in the end is one-to-one. If you find a person who's different from you in whatever combination of ways, and you learn how to share with them, then things change. But if you try to address a deep idea to a group of people that have an enormously heterogeneous nature, it becomes thin, it becomes strained, and it lacks the kind of depth of belief and caring that causes real contributions to be possible between one person and another. I mentioned my situation with Takemitsu. After we met, he promised himself he would learn 2 English words every night before bed. And so by the end of the time that we had together, his grammar was terrible, but boy, his ability to evoke meaning was magnificent.
I think your question, it's a question that visual artists are asking themselves all the time now because of especially the technological changes, especially with AI. But this is a question that's been asked probably since the inception of not just photography, but woodblock printing, metal engraving. Every time a new technology comes in, some people are put out of business, and other people who couldn't have been artists beforehand, join the fray. And this is a sort of a quantum leap in that regard. I think the limiting factor, of course, is the energy it uses. You can do a really cool movie and using AI, and it uses as much electricity as a town in a day, and that I think could be just as with crypto and as with non-fungible tokens. All of those are we're coming up against those limitations. But for artists, the question of skill and I spent all this time learning the skill, and now someone can do something as good or better than I can. This is especially true in the movie industry today, when there's just astonishing things that are occurring, not just monthly, but like weekly. You're seeing these changes are they're quite threatening. So I don't see that as unifying people so much as atomizing them.
Atul Singh, I'm the founder of Fair Observer, a world news publication. My question is informed by the sentence you used, Fatehpur Sikri, imagined by Albert Speer. Now, those of you who don't know, Fatehpur Sikri is a city now uninhabited, built by Akbar, 16th century. What transpired in Malaysia because of that reimagination by Mahathir Mohamad? And what lessons does it have for art in particular and life in general?
In 3 minutes.
Well, as I said, Mahathir was a transformative politician, and there's been no one like him before and no one since. And he recognized, he marshaled all the arts in service of his vision of this Malaysia. Actually, when I was there in high school, he had a book called The Malay Dilemma, where he sort of laid out his vision of the races as being quite separate, and that the Malays, in particular, their status under the Constitution needed to be enhanced. So Malaysia, if you don't know, has something called the Malays and other indigenous races are called the Bumiputras, the sons of the soil or the princes of the earth, and they're considered the rightful inhabitants of Malaysia, and they get special scholarships, loans, access to employment, and so on, that the other races do not. And then the argument that Mahathir put out is, we're going to, as I said, make a lot of Malay billionaires. We're going to grow the economic pie. We're not going to take away from everyone else. We're just going to make the pie bigger, and all the bigger will go to the Malays. And he was very successful that way. But to your question about art, it's his what he's done. I think the art that Malaysians were doing before were sort of like akin to the founders, as I said. There were a lot of people working together in the arts. This focus on nationalism and ethno-nationalism among the Malays has created a sort of a backlash or a response from the other races, in that there's been this renaissance of Chinese dance and art and painting and sculpture, and a renaissance in Indian dance. Bharatanatyam was something that you didn't. That's an Indian dance form that wasn't especially popular. Now it's considered de rigueur that you learn that. There's a huge explosion in Indian dance schools in Malaysia. So he's managed to. So the other races have essentially everyone's competing to keep themselves. That their ethnicity and their culture alive. So it hasn't subsumed the other races. Everyone has gotten much more conscious of their race in every aspect of their lives, and things that were possible back in 1970. I mean, if you've been to Malaysia, you probably noticed that virtually every Malay woman that you'll see is wearing a hijab. Some are wearing niqab, which was unheard of in 1973. Nobody did. You might go out, if a woman went out, she might wear like a diaphanous scarf around her head. And there's something called the baju kebaya. If you've been on Singapore Airlines or Malaysian Airlines, it's this very form-fitting batik outfit that was quite common to be seen in the streets. It's now You see it on Singapore Airlines and Malaysian Airlines, but almost nowhere else. Everyone wears the baju kurung, which is much less revealing. And so these are all things that's part of that change from the easygoing Malay Islam to the Wahhabi brand.
Thank you, Bryn.
That's enough.
Yes. So we unfortunately have to stop now. Thank you very much. And the next presentation will be in 10 minutes.